Hey guys, it's Miharu, and welcome back to SpyroCast. This is episode 26, and today we have a very special guest. Please welcome to the show, Oliver Wade.
Hello, everybody.
All right. So I guess the first question I wanted to ask was, how did you get started working at Insomniac?
I was working at Disney Interactive at the time. I was the animation director there on all of their video games. And I met John Fiorito there. He was an artist there. He was one of the lead artists. And he left to go work at Insomniac. And just randomly at a barbecue at a friend's house one day, he asked me what I thought about working for a small company, making a character-driven video game, and being one of just two animators that they had. And I said, that sounds certainly interesting. So I went over to Insomniac and took a test. They gave me a character. I don't even remember what it was at this point. And I did, in an afternoon, I did 4 or 5 animations. The weird thing was that I had not been actually animating for a while because as a director, you spend a lot of your time making schedules and, basically giving direction on how the animation should look. But physically sitting down and doing it is not something that you spend a lot of time doing. So I had to kind of spend a little time relearning Maya again. But then I took the test, apparently did okay. And they hired me to animate all of the crystal dragons in the very first game.
Oh, wow. So you did do that.
Yeah, so that was the very first thing I did. There was another animator, Elaine Medron, who did all of the other character designs and animation in the game. But he just did not have time to animate the crystal dragon. So I came in probably 2 to 3 months before the project was finished, before the first game was finished, and animated all the crystal dragons. I think there were a few that I didn't quite get to that Elaine, when he was finished, helped do a couple of them. I don't remember which ones. But did spend a lot of time. It was very funny because we were sharing computers at the time because they hired more people than they had computers for. So I made a deal with Ted Price to sleep on the couch during the day and work all night, which was fine. I basically lived at the studio for almost 2 weeks, 3 weeks, just to try and get them all finished.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it was certainly a work of passion because the game was incredible. I could tell that. And I just wanted to help as much as I could.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard stories about like people like working just like that, like, so late into the night and just like living basically there at the studio just to like get things on games done and stuff like that.
That happens a lot. And there's, what they call crunch culture, which a lot of people are trying to get stopped. But when you're working on something that you're very passionate about, you can't be taken advantage of. But this was, again, a long time ago, back during the early days of the PlayStation, where just getting quality titles out was something that people really wanted to do. So again, at the time, it wasn't a big deal. I was very happy to do so. But then you got to a point where you just sort of realized that that's how games were made for about 9 months. Especially working on the Spyro and Ratchet Clank games for about 9 months. Things were normal. You'd work a 40-hour week, a little bit overtime here and there if things fell behind. But for the most part, it was relatively calm. But you knew what was coming at the end of the project was, 60 to 80-hour weeks trying to finish this up. And you try to balance it over the course of the project so that doesn't happen. But inevitably, you want to make it as good as you possibly can. So that's when the crunch kind of creeps in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it ended up working out in the end because those animations are really iconic.
Well, that's great. Yeah, it is very interesting as someone who was involved with them, looking back, knowing where we are now and what's possible now. And everything, when you look at it now, just looks so simple. Like that was just very rudimentary, and it just, got the job done. But there wasn't a lot of subtlety and complexity to it. But that's all we had at the time. When you're dealing with a 256 polygon character with about 12 joints in the entire body, there's only so much subtlety you can put in there. And all of the texture work was just done right on the polygons. We were painting in very simple programs, but that's what the technology was at the time. But again, we were super proud of what we created, and I still am. But it is interesting seeing people go, oh, well, the character designs in Reignited are so much better. They're not really better. They just have about 1,000 times more polygons to make them, to really flesh them out. The drawing, the design is very similar in many cases, but the way you could realize it in the actual game itself has grown quite a bit.
Right. I think what Reignited did, it's wonderfully updated with all the different designs and animations. What they were able to do was incredible, but back then, from like making so much out of what you had to work with, like that was also pretty incredible.
Yeah, and that is something that I also, like you said, I am very proud of, because we at the time pushed things to its limit. I mean, if you look, the really fun thing for me is looking back at Spyro 2 and realizing that every single one of those worlds has an intro scene and an end scene, that we had to, write all of that and, do those little separate animations that were not part of the character animation. It's just the little mini movies. And just to realize that we actually got all those done is still pretty incredible to me. Because again, I'm sure that, the development cycle for the Spyro games was a year. Mm-hmm. We would finish working on one, immediately start working on the other one, and a year later, that one was finished. So there wasn't a lot of time for, oh, well, wouldn't it be nice if we did this? And let's spend some time developing. No, just, can you make this? Okay, let's make that. Okay, no, to put that in. Now on to the next thing. Let's make that. So, yeah, a lot of the stuff was done very quickly, but still quite proud of the result.
That's awesome. So I know that you did the concept work for a lot of characters for the second and third games.
I did, yes. Elaine left after the first game was done. I was the only animator on the second game for quite a while. Wow. Until we realized that just was not going to work. So we hired two people in pretty rapid succession. And they did a ton of the animations as well. But I was responsible for I didn't do any designs in the first game. As everybody knows, Charles Zembalist designed Spyro.
Yes.
But aside from Spyro, I designed every character for the second and third game, including, the enemies, the NPCs, everything. And the interesting thing, because I talked to someone else recently about this, but the interesting thing about that is, as I said before, we were moving very quickly. Almost all of the designs, especially the enemy designs, were designed during the level design meeting, where the level designer would come and tell us, this is how the level works. I need an enemy that can do this. This one has to be flame proof. So we need one to do this. And they would explain how the whole level is going to come together and what the animation needs were for it. Those meetings lasted about a half an hour. And I'm one of those people that I can't sit still in a meeting unless I'm drawing. I have to occupy that part of my brain with drawing so that I can pay attention. And I use that to my advantage by just doing all of the character designs during those meetings. And by the time the meeting was over, the characters were designed. So, and there were rarely any changes or revisions to them, because I knew what a low poly count we had. So I would try to, and I actually built most of the characters as well. So I would build them and texture them and add little details or make some small changes and adjustments as I was actually building them. There was no need to redraw them, because normally when you do a drawing like that, it's to show somebody else how you want it to look. I knew how I wanted it to look because I was one building them. So I didn't bother doing the drawing again. I'm like, okay, I'll adjust this or fix this as I'm actually making the character.
Right. I just imagine you like drawing right now. It's like what, or in this, or at the end you're just like, hey, I drew this. It's like what?
That could definitely have happened, but nope. I'm trying to use my whole brain to pay attention right now.
Okay. Be funny.
Because normally I'm just listening. Here I have to actually talk, so that's different.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What was your favorite character that you designed?
It's one of those things that I've had the same answer for a while, and I guess it's still true that Alora is probably my favorite one. Simply because I like the way the character turned out in digital form, considering what we had to work with. And then just as far as a character goes, I like the way that she interacted with Spyro. So having those two together actually, to me, heightened my enjoyment of the actual design itself, because they just seem to play so well together. But yeah, again, things I've said before, that she's actually designed sort of based on a friend of mine who is an actress, and then I took letters from Caroline Trujillo's name and just mixed them around until I'm like, okay, Alora's a name, so I actually named her as well. But yeah, she was fun to do, and yeah, she was originally going to be a centaur, but I realized actually as I was building her, I'm like, animate all four of those legs, and we don't have enough polygons to build them anyway. So let's go ahead and simplify it and chop her legs off and give her a little tail. So it worked out for the best.
And now she's a fawn, you dork.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's funny because I've also had people ask if she was connected to the other fawns that are with the Earth Shapers. I cannot remember the name at that level, but those were designed completely separately. They didn't really have anything to do with each other.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering if she was related. Like, yeah, those are distant cousins. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, because we never really did say where all of the characters, like Hunter and the professor, where they came from. They just lived in this world somewhere.
Yeah, they live somewhere in Avalar.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too, that I do see a lot of people ask questions like, "Oh, what's the backstory of this? And did you figure out how to make all of this fit together?" Again, there was very little thought given to that. Again, because we were going so quickly to make another game, it's like, okay, these characters all look good. This guy fits here. Let's make this one short. Was pretty much about as far as we got, as far as creating any sort of backstory, just because we didn't have the luxury of that kind of development time where we could sit and really put it all together. It was more, and I think to the game's betterment, it was more about just making everything fun gameplay wise. We didn't give a ton of thought to like, oh, well, there's going to, what is the story here? And I know that people have done a lot of fan fiction and that kind of stuff, which is great, because leaving it that open-ended, you're free to write whatever you want. There are very little restrictions on what you can create. And yeah, we were just about making sure the gameplay was fun. But as I mentioned a minute ago, the decision to like make Ripto, for example, my decision was 100% based on, okay, Nasty Nork was really big. Let's make Ripto really small. It was that simple. Just to make sure that as you were playing the second game, the main bad guy wasn't the stereotypical big hulking thing that you see all the time, so you didn't in any way confuse it with the first film. So let's really do something different. And yeah, I think Ripto was another one of those that the design was done on the first shot. I just did one little design, threw a horn on his head. And it's funny because you get questions like, well, what is Ripto? I don't know. He's some sort of dinosaur dragon thing.
Yeah. Apparently Enter the Dragonfly said he's a Riptok, but whatever.
Exactly. But yeah, the thing is, for me, I have over the years got better at drawing humans and men and women. I, for the longest time, just drew creatures because I couldn't draw them wrong. You had nothing to compare it to. So when I made Ripto, that's what Ripto looks like. You can't say, oh, well, this part should be, nope, that's just out of my head. It's Ripto. That's what he looks like. It's perfect.
Oh, so yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was much easier to do that way. But and then again, you get things like Sheila. Well, she looks just like a kangaroo. Yeah, that's because she's supposed to be a kangaroo, so that's what I drew.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why the Rhinox and stuff look weird, because those were just complete fantasy creatures. I can make whatever they want. So yeah, that's where Ripto came from.
That's a funny story. I also love the story about Ripto's name and how it came from the Japanese.
Okay, now I'm gonna say something here that may get contradicted. I don't know, but I am 99% sure that I came up with the name for the second game because I saw the case for the second one. We had it sitting around. I'm like, and somebody else may have pointed out that it looked like that said Ripto. And I'm like, well, that has to be the name of the bad guy for the second game. So when I was designing the character, I'm like, this character's name is Ripto. So we came up with Ripto's Rage. Again, the actual Ripto's Rage, I think somebody else did, but I was the one who decided that Ripto would be the bad guy.
Nice.
And again, if you see that the case for that game, that's exactly what it looks like it says. We didn't have to really fudge it too much.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny because my next question was if you had any funny stories or stories about working at Insomniac or working on the Spyro games or anything that stands out.
Boy, there's a couple of stories that I have told before. One of them, again, I was just asked recently about, was how all the crystal creatures came about in the crystal level. I think it's the third game, where there was a crystal beaver and a crystal bear. Originally, John Fiorito, the person I just mentioned, designed that level as a forest. And so I'm like, oh, okay, we'll make a bear and a beaver. But again, trying to make them weird, I was like, okay, let's make a flying beaver, just something different. And then it wasn't until the level was done and we'd already completely finished the characters, they're like, oh, this level is full of crystals. I'm like, what? Nobody told me this was crystals. So all I did was adjust the textures. Everything's exactly the same, but I made them look like they were made out of crystal. So it's just sometimes decisions get made at the last second, and sometimes for the better. That level is really weird because of that, and that's part of the reason that I like it.
That's actually one of my favorite levels in that game.
Yeah, it is fun. Another thing, I've heard people talk about Dr. Shemp before and where the name came from. Do you know that story?
I've heard the thing about always getting the Shemp or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, just to have it on record. I believe it was Matt Whiting, who was one of the programmers, came up with that term, or at least passed it around the office. The idea of it being that if you're old enough like me to remember the Three Stooges, you wanted to watch the episodes with Larry, Moe, and Curly. That's the classic. So you're like, okay, great. I'm going to sit down and I'll watch the Three Stooges. And then it comes on, it's Larry, Moe, and Shemp. You're like, oh, man, I didn't want this one. So that was kind of our phrase for when you're anticipating something and it doesn't quite turn out the way you expect, you get the Shemp. So that's where that phrase came from. And then that's where the name Dr. Shemp came from, was from that thing. But yeah, that was a term that we used around the office quite often.
That makes sense now. I get it.
Yep. Oh, another thing too. I wish I had audio of this, but one of our favorite things, and again, I hope this doesn't get me in trouble with Ted, but one of our favorite things was we didn't have the final voices at first. So Ted did the voice for Hunter.
Oh, really?
He did this really goofy Southern accent. Well, maybe you are a little dragon. And just hearing Ted do that voice cracked us all up. So that was something that we also said around the office in Ted voice quite often, just for fun.
I would love to hear that.
It was pretty funny. Oh, and one last one. The other big phrase, especially one of the other animators, John Lally and I used to say back and forth, anytime we were working on something that we were almost done with, that we're like, okay, I got to make some adjustments to this. We were supposed to say, just a few more adjustments to these arms. And then that was just sort of our go-to whenever we were trying to finish up something at work. Those are the best stories I can think of off the top of my head.
Oh, that's completely fine. I haven't heard some of those, so that's great.
Very good.
Oh, I love hearing that. Um, so going off the whole thing about like how you didn't have a lot of time to think of like story stuff, like about, you know, all the characters and like all that. Uh, did you ever at any time have your own like personal headcanon stories of like why certain characters did what they did or looked the way they did or
Honestly, not really. Uh, the, I think if I did that, I may not have been as free to do what I needed to do because some things would have had to make sense to me in some certain ways. Like, for example, there were a couple of different designs for the sorceress. The original design had her very much looking like a very large female dragon. She had little tiny wings and was holding a dragon egg in the original design that I did. And I think there was actually some talk that they didn't want to introduce female dragons that way, that the first one that you really met was some sort of evil queen. So I'm like, okay, I'll change her, make her look more like a hippo thing, maybe with the tail. Again, just making some stuff up.
yeah.
But I think that kind of what that goes back to is the more that I try to sort of link story in there, the more difficult it became because then there became logic reasons why you couldn't do it. So I was trying to just keep it kind of freewheeling and not really concern myself with it. Like, for example, why was Bianca a bunny? There was no reason for it.
Just drew a bunny.
It just worked. I'm like, okay, this looks good. I'll draw a bunny. Okay. And then that was really about as much thought was given to it.
Yeah. Well, I love Bianca. She's one of my favorite characters. I talk about her on my channel all the time. I make a bunch of different videos about her, and like I'm always thinking of like the little headcanon things of like what her story might be, because like what's her past like.
Sure. And again, I love that it's open-ended like that so people can make up their own decisions. I really, as far as I can remember, and again, this is how long ago? 20 some odd years ago that this.
Yeah.
What year did this first Spyro come out? You think I would know that? I
don't. Let's see. The first one came out in 98.
Okay. So, 25 or so years ago. Anyway, it was a long time ago. And so a lot of these things have slipped my mind at this point. But I do remember when we were talking about designing Bianca is that we wanted there to be a reveal of some sort, that we wanted her to seem villainous at the beginning and then have her kind of switch up midway through that so she becomes an ally towards the end. And that was the only real guiding principle for what her design was, to give her the hood so that you couldn't really see who she was really well. And I believe part of the reason for making her the bunny was so when the hood came down, there was a change in her silhouette so that you could actually see that she was hiding something under there the entire time that would make her very different from the Bianca version, the villain version, to the post-villain version, so that they would be different.
Right. I think that that reveal when she takes off her hood and you can see, her little ears, like I think that's very important to her character.
Yep.
It's just, even though like you have the like when you have the game and you see on the back of the box, like she's already there, like
of course
without the hood on the back of the box, you're just like, well, but it's still in game. Some
things we have very little control over. But of course, if you played a video game before, it's not like you don't see it coming. Right. That's just kind of a standard video game story trope that, somebody's going to switch sides, or, somebody's not who you thought they were. That's just simple storytelling in a video game world.
Right. I think, and that's important. It's one of the earliest instances that I can think of in a video game in which like you had like a reformed villain, because I'm sure that happened before that, but there's not a lot of things that I can think of, like other games that did that.
Well, yeah, and of course that stuff then carries forward too. with Insomniac with Captain Quark and the Ratchet and Clank games that, you have someone who is very villainous. But the funny thing about Quark, though, is he never did quite reform. He just wasn't as evil, maybe. But
he's still a jerk.
Exactly.
Oh, man. All right. And last question. So what are you doing now?
Currently, I am working for a company called Embodied. And I've been working there for almost the last 3 years, creating a actual physical robot. It is designed to help children who have some trying to figure out the exact way. Again, I don't really know what the company's line is, but children with emotional needs that need to be able to communicate better, and just in general be a companion for children that need help with some emotional issues. But we've also designed it, I think, pretty well that any child could play with it and enjoy it. One of the things that it does really well is you can just sit and basically discuss anything with it. It has a pretty robust AI that you can sit and talk about Legos or Star Wars or whatever you want to. But it also has programming that it goes through every day to help kids regulate, to do like animal breaths and to do different affirmations during the day and really be sort of a companion and a guide. But what we've done, I think, which is interesting, is we've dressed it up in such a way that the child, we've packaged it so that the child is the robot's mentor. We send the robot to the child, but the child is basically teaching the robot how to be human. So the idea is, instead of the robot teaching the child, we reverse that so that the child has responsibility for making sure that this robot understands what it's like to live in a human world. So what my actual job is, I am the animation director, but I guess more importantly, I'm the only animator as well. So I'm kind of my own boss. But what my job is to do all of the robot animations. I use Maya as well to do all the animations, and then those get transferred onto the actual physical robot as well. It has kind of a screen for a face, so I can do really soft, subtle emotional changes because it doesn't have. There are some robots that are trying to do a similar thing that have sort of standard robot clicky eyes and a mouth that sort of doesn't really make many mouth positions. So that's why we decided to go with the screen, so we could do a lot of subtlety in the emotion that goes with it. And then on top of that, since we have a screen, we have the ability for the robot to sort of think of different things. So we put little things in a thought bubble that the robot thinks about. So I've done all the artwork for that as well, all the character designs, all the icon designs. And then, the last thing is that the robot comes from a place called the Global Robotics Laboratory, and we've created a huge backstory there with the creators and all the different robots that live there. So I've done, I guess at this point, I think it's 13 or 14 different characters that live at the GRL that the kids can hear about and learn about, and there's little animations that they do as well. So it's been a really interesting project from the standpoint that it's not the standard video game stuff that I'm used to, and I'm working with a lot of brilliant people that basically built a robot from scratch, physically built the robot from scratch.
Wow.
And then, all the programming that goes into it, all the AI that goes into it. We just have a lot of really incredible people making this thing. And today is the day that it finally is going out to the customers that were the early adopters who were the first ones to get it. We've had it in a beta program where we've been getting feedback from children to help refine what we have. But this is the first day the customers are receiving their robots after all of this time. But again, not to plug anything, but if anybody wants to see what it looks like, if you go to Embodied, embodied.com, you can see the actual robot and what it looks like and get an idea of what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely gonna link that in the description of the podcast there. Let everyone know about that. That sounds absolutely amazing. I want one of those robots.
Yeah, I'm actually staring at him now. He's been sitting. He, she. That's the other thing too. We designed it to be up to the child to decide what to label the robot. The voices, not really distinctive one way or the other. That was kind of important. But yeah, it's sitting here on my desk now and just ready to go.
All right. That sounds so cool. I'm glad you're still doing all this cool work even now.
Yeah, this has been an interesting career. I mean, after Spyro and Ratchet and Clank, I worked at a little place here in Dallas doing video games. I worked on the Ratchet and Clank movie in Vancouver, done a lot of freelance designs for different companies. But yeah, this has been kind of a passion project for the last 3 years, and I think it's turned out pretty well.
Very nice. Yeah, actually, didn't get to talk much about Ratchet and Clank. Of course, this is SpyroCast, but I did want to talk a little bit about that. I guess. What was your favorite character that you designed on Ratchet and Clank?
Let's see, that's a little bit different. I actually was the animation director on Ratchet and Clank, but we hired Dave Gerton between Spyro and Ratchet, and Dave and I collaborated in the early versions of it, but all of those designs are his, and actually another artist, Doug Baldwin, did quite a bit of the design work as well. So I was just the animation director on Ratchet and Clank. Although, actually, that's not 100% true. John Lally, one of the other animators, and I wrote the first two scripts. So I went from character designer, animation director to writer, animation director for the Ratchet and Clank games. But I will say that of all the designs in that game, the plumber is my favorite. That is by far my favorite character in the entire Ratchet and Clank universe.
Oh, yeah. We're always so happy to see the plumber, always breaking the fourth wall.
Yep. Well, and yeah, the probably the most interesting story I have about that is when we were going in to do the early recording sessions for Ratchet and Clank, we were just looking for people to come in and do some voices. So I had a bunch of friends of mine come in, but one of the people who came in is an actor named Neil Flynn, who you might know from Scrubs. He was the janitor on Scrubs. He was the dad on The Middle. But yeah, just a relatively successful actor, but just he hadn't done any real TV at that point. But just a friend of mine that I played poker with, so I'm like, "You want to come in and record some of this?" And he ended up doing an amazing job as the plumber.
Oh wow!
Yeah, he also voices a couple other things, like one of the little scientists in Rilgar, I think it is, who gives you some sort of thing when you go through the sewer tubes to meet him. He did Skid McMarks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here's a funny story. He hated doing that. I'm like, you got to do like a surfer dude. And he's like, all right, I'm not very good at it, but okay. So yeah, he hated doing that voice. But I think he voiced the plumber in the first couple of games, and then they had someone else come in and do it after that. Once his TV career took off a little bit, he was kind of busy.
Yeah. I really like Up Your Arsenal. That's my favorite game in the entire series because it introduced Nefarious, who is my actual favorite video game villain, like, of all time. Just an excellent character.
Yeah, he is really good. The design of him is great as well. And actually, a little tidbit I could give you here is I think part of the reason that he was so successful as a character is that between Going Commando and Up Your Arsenal, we hired an animator named Steve Ryder. And he was, as the animation director, one of my jobs was to give scenes to different people. And like, here, you need to animate this, you need to animate that. And then I gave one of the first Nefarious scenes to Steve, and he was pretty much the only person I let animate Nefarious after that. It was amazing that, all the little things where Nefarious moves very quickly and comes to a stop, just the sort of crazy over the top way that Nefarious moves and animates, that all came directly from Steve. I again, as the animation director, would like to pretend that I told him to do all of that, but all I would do is go, "That was awesome," and didn't really give him any direction besides that. So yeah, Nefarious is a great character, and the relationship between him and Lawrence, and the way that the little soap opera would come on when he froze. some really good writing. That was that was not one that I did not write that one. We hired another writer for that, but yeah, there's some really, really good stuff.
Well, that is that's so awesome. Yeah, so I guess we're going to end it there. It was great being able to talk to you. Thank you so much for being on.
You bet. Always fun to talk about this kind of stuff. Again, it takes a little while to get my memory going of different things, but yeah, it's always fun to talk about.
Right. Okay, so yeah, that's gonna do it. As always, this has been Miharu, and I will see you next time. Until then, this is Miharu again, signing off. I don't know how to end my things anymore.